Does the public have a right to know what's in these documents? Should the government release these secret studies into Brexit's economic impact? Let's get a view on this. You've heard him a few times before on this late night talk. So Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth advisor, joins us. Hello, Jonathan.
Hello, Duncan.
Good to have you on again, sir. Well, simple question. Do you want to have a look at these documents?
Yeah, sure, why not? I like a laugh now and again.
Why would it be amusing?
Well, as far as we know, quote, experts, unquote, have compiled them.
Yeah.
I seem to recall we had the Organisation of Economics and Cooperation and Development, the OECD, the International Monetary Fund, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the EU, of course, itself, the Treasury, the CBI, Uncle Tom Cobley, full of experts, saying that if we vote to leave on the 23rd of June 2016, the UK economy will tank. Well, it has done exactly the opposite. We had a group of experts, all the best, apparently the smartest experts in the land, all the bankers, all the banks, the Bank of England, I don't think I mentioned, mustn't forget them. They all said that they were all wrong. So that's why I say I like a laugh now and again.
So you're working on the basis that in the 58 secret studies, it's all painting a picture of doom and gloom, maybe by some of the people that you've just mentioned.
I'm not. What I'm trying to say is, experts are for naught. They're charlatans.
They're discredited.
No one can tell the future. We cannot know what the economic outcome of Brexit will be.
Does the public have a right to know what's in these documents?
Yes,
they do.
Sure, why not? Why?
But is this not a problem, Jonathan? Is this not a problem?
Forgive
me, because if these documents are released and they paint a picture of doom and gloom, because everyone from the Bank of England downwards have contributed to them, then people who voted Brexit might just think, well, you would say that, wouldn't you?
I imagine that is one of the responses. But, you know, whatever comes out, it'll just be of intellectual interest and stimulation. The reality is we had the one and only referendum that we were promised about a year and a half ago. At no time was it ever suggested that we were going to have a second referendum. We've had it. Let's just get on with it.
What about this view that is circulated from time to time regarding these documents, which is the public can't see them, we can't have them released because they could damage the ongoing Brexit negotiations? What's your view on that?
I would suggest that it's a massive red herring. The negotiations, you and I have discussed this previously, the negotiations are a joke anyway. The EU, for simplicity, want 10, we want 0. I gather that the Brexit Secretary, David Davis, and the team will move towards 5 in due course. Whether or not the EU moves towards 5 and get a compromise, I've no idea. But whatever comes out in the public domain, it's not going to affect these negotiations. These negotiations are going to continue anyway. In fact, you know, my suspicion is, and I said this 6 months ago, I will wager you, but unfortunately this is never going to come out, or if it does, it will be in 30 years' time. I will wager you that when Jean-Claude Juncker went to 10 Downing Street 6 months ago, he and Theresa May shook hands on a deal. I'll bet you in reality that's what's actually happened, and everything that's going on in the last 6 months and in the next 12 months is all a circus, as a lot of these things are. However, we'll never know what the truth is. Yes, They can publish whatever information they want, whoever has produced it. It's not going to affect on the negotiations, and in any case, the negotiations are a circus.
All right. When we talk about experts and the idea that they don't know what they're talking about, or they might say certain things based on their own individual views, if experts don't know the impact of Brexit, I mean, is there anyone personally that you think you would like to hear from and their assessment of what it means for this country?
On both sides, whether your bias is to remain in the EU or to leave the EU, of course, everyone has an agenda, as they say. Economically, you will probably not be so objective that you will come out with an objective report. There will be bias there in, for example, the assumptions you make. I say to you that as far as I can see, some companies will lose out because we leave the EU, and I say to you, I certainly hope we do leave the EU. Some companies will do very well out of leaving the EU. My personal view is that net in the UK after 5 or 10 years will benefit by being out of the EU. But you can come up with another, or I can come up with another person who will have a similar view or a different view. Yeah. But the point is this: no one can tell about the economics in the future. It's like forecasting the stock market. You can maybe do forecast the market for the next 6 or 12 months, but the next 5 years, don't even try. It's not going to happen. But there's one thing that I can say to you categorically, and we could find lots of other people who would confirm this on both sides. Some, however, I'll tell you what it is, some on the Remain side will disagree with us. Some on the Remain side will admit, yes, it's true. If we leave the EU, we bring back democracy to the UK. Democracy that, in effect, the United Kingdom, or at that time England, invented with Magna Carta 800 years ago, and then a few hundred years later with the Bill of Rights, then emancipation and widespread vote by men and then women and everyone at the age of 18. Being in the EU, we have unelected bureaucrats. This is the major point of all this. Determining our laws, it's already up to 60 or 70% of our laws.
Well, I mean, all of these points that you're making was made as part of the various campaigns.
One final point, Westminster will become like a county council.
Yeah. No, I mean, all of this was said as part of the various campaigns on the run-up to the EU referendum, and I understand why you're repeating the point now. Whilst I've got you on as an economist, let's just turn our attention tonight to the big financial story of the day about the rise in interest rates for the first time in 10 years. I mean, unless you've been under a rock today, you will know that the Bank of England has increased interest rates. The bank rate has been lifted from 0.25% to 0.5% for the first time since July 2007. You're an economist. Is this a good move?
Good or bad, I think it's the Mark Carney, or Carnage, as I call him, the Governor of the Bank of England, sheepishly having to admit that he and his crowd messed up about a year ago when they cut the interest rate because of what Brexit might do. Well, didn't they get that wrong totally and utterly? So all they've actually done is reversed what they did a year ago. I think the bigger issue is not this 0.25% rise. The bigger issue is what's it leading to. Yeah. And we're seeing the global economy is quite strong. Inflation is rising globally. Commodity prices are soaring. Oil, for example, in the last year and a half has doubled, and that is the biggest input to inflation in our system. So we're seeing higher and higher inflation, and it seems to me that we can forecast that inflation is embedded now because they've kept interest rates too low for too long. The pound has gone down for too many years. Thus, we're sucking in imports, higher-priced imports. Thus, we've embedded inflation. Inflation is rising for years, which means, Duncan, interest rates are likely to rise for years.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's going to be 0.25% every 3 months, but what I've been saying publicly and privately is by a year and a half, we can expect 1 to 1.5% base rate.
Yeah.
As you say, currently 0.5%.
Yeah.
By 3 or 4 years, we could probably expect 3 to 6% base rate.
Okay, and that makes things really interesting. So we're not talking about now, we're going several or a few years down the line. The winners and the losers, it gets to, the interest rate continues to increase. Savers and pensioners do well. The concern that we're hearing about today is the effect it might have on borrowers. Do you think that's a justifiable concern?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. Not so much the technical term is unsecured borrowers, as in personal loans, credit cards, car loans, because those interest rates have been pretty high anyway, not related really to the base rate. I think we've got to focus on mortgage rates. And yes, mortgage rates have been rising even before this rate rise, and mortgage rates will rise along with base rates over the next several years, maybe the next 10 years, if indeed inflation is as embedded as I believe it is. Well, the fact is, mortgage holders have done extremely well in the best part of a decade.
Yeah.
Whereas the other side of the coin, of course, as you say, pensioners, retirees with savings, they've been shafted. Tenants, basically anyone under the age of 35 or maybe 40, who haven't been able to buy property and make vast amounts of money from property, they have been shafted. So, maybe what we're seeing over some years is a rebalancing away from homeowners and borrowers doing fantastically well to tenants and savers doing well. And I can't see a problem with that.
Yeah, is there not a knock-on effect, though, to people who rent? Because, of course, if people who've got mortgages start to be affected by this 5 or 6 years down the line significantly, and we're living in a city now where people don't stand a hope in hell in getting on the property ladder, so there's a mass rental market. Theoretically, the knock-on effect, if your mortgage goes up and you're a property developer, maybe someone who's got a couple of properties, you're renting them out, you're going to pass on that increase to people who are trying to rent in London. So there's going to be a knock-on effect to the rental market.
No, that's far too simplistic. As they say, that's first-level thinking. Second-level thinking, actually, is buy-to-letters, first of all, are being increasingly hammered by higher and higher taxes, which started last year, and by 2020, taxes on buy-to-let will really be massive if you're a higher rate taxpayer, and many of them are. That's the first thing. The second point is, we were just talking, there'll be higher mortgage costs for those buy-to-letters.
Yeah.
So what will they do? Hang around and try and get higher rents? No, they won't achieve higher rents. What they'll do is they'll offload their so-called investments, and which means over time there'll be a higher supply of property for sale. But without higher demand, I mean, why would you buy a house if mortgage costs are going up? You wouldn't. So therefore, higher supply, same level of demand, we can reasonably expect that actually house prices will probably fall in the medium to long term. And that, of course, will help tenants who would have liked to get into buying.
No, that's rubbish. It's rubbish because let me run something past you. If you're a nurse, right, on £26,000 a year, even if what you say comes true in London, you still will not be able to buy a property. So if we follow your line of thinking, your second level thinking, as opposed to my first level thinking, if we follow it through, theoretically, if that happens and all these buy-to-letters just go, no point, too much hassle, can't make the cash out of it anymore, I'm just going to sell my property and crack on doing something else, there is less rental property available for that nurse to rent, and she still is not in a position to buy a property in London.
I don't buy that, because there are, for example, and you know, people think I'm crazy when I say that. All they have to do is look at council records. There are in England and Wales over 600,000 unoccupied properties. Many hundreds of thousands of properties will come on the market when people finally accept that house prices are not going to rise ad infinitum.
But the point I'm putting to you, because I think it's an interesting point to debate, is even if what you say is true, and we start seeing more properties to buy on the market, in London, even if the property prices drop, they're not going to be available at an affordable level that someone who's an essential worker in London can afford, unless it comes down to 120 grand for a one-bedroom flat. It's not going to work, is it?
Well, in the short term, no doubt, when there's a change in the big picture for the last 40 years has been falling interest rates, rising lending, and rising house prices, and also rising tenancies. If the big picture was to change entirely, and we see over the next 10, 15, 20 years sustained rising interest rates, rising inflation, rising wages, falling house prices, well, maybe in the short term, the difficulty that you raise, maybe that will be there. It's debatable, but okay, I'll give you it. But in the longer term, no. Falling house prices in the long term makes it much more low cost for average earners to buy property, or indeed to reduce their costs of living.
As always, fascinating to chew the cud with you, Jonathan. Thank you. That's Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth advisor. A couple of things.